Welcome everyone to our weekly reading of Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Prometheus Rising presents a taxonomy of consciousness with 8 circuits and an implied evolutionary progression. We are reading it to explore ways to hack our consciousness for better living. I'm Bubble, also known as Alley Wurds. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, and I've worked with and written about Prometheus Rising over the past 5 years. Last week we read Chapter 18, The Non-Local Quantum Circuits. If you missed it, look it up on our YouTube channel. This session will also be recorded and uploaded. Alright, well we are on Chapter 19 now. And the chapter picks up on page 271 with the picture that you see on the screen. So it's Chapter 19, Prometheus Rising. But the picture is of a meditating person in something resembling lotus position floating over top of a pillow. We have a quote from F.M. from his book Upwingers. We are extending ourselves in space and time, not because of capitalism or socialism, but in spite of them. The right-left capitalist socialist establishments are psychologically unprepared for our emerging situation in time and space. And that is the same futurist writer that has been quoted throughout the book. Right, the chapter actually picks up on page 273. According to Patanjali, there are 7 limbs to yoga, or as we would say, 7 steps or stages. The first is asana, which consists of holding a single posture, usually sitting, for prolonged periods of time. This is an attempt in our terminology to stabilize the biosurvival circuit by drowning it in monotony. You sit and sit and sit and sit and sit, and then eventually an internal peace is realized, which signifies the atrophying of all background levels of unconscious or unnoticed biosurvival anxiety. In other schools, since asana is so monotonous and slow working, and because war, Second Circuit mammalian struggles over territory, is so common, among domesticated primates, an alternative method of stabilizing the biosurvival circuit is used: martial arts. Aikido, judo, karate, etc. all emerged from yoga-like mystic schools as biosurvival reprogrammers. The second step in classical yoga, according to Patanjali, is pranayama. We have already commented on the efficiency of this breathing technique in quieting and mellowing out Second Circuit emotional programs. It will already be seen that yoga, like brainwashing, begins from the bottom up, working on the more primitive and older circuits first. The third step in yoga is dharana or mantra. Dharana consists of concentrating on a single image, such as a vividly imagined red triangle, and ruthlessly pushing aside any other images, verbalizations, or impressions that cross the mind screen. In practice, this is beyond the powers of most students, so the majority of yoga teachers substitute mantra, which is concentration by repetition on a single sentence, usually nonsensical, such as Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, or Om Tat Sat Om, or whatever. Either practice, dharana or mantra, stops the third circuit internal monologue if persisted in for long enough periods each day. The Western mystical equivalent is Kabbalah, the most complicated Jewish joke, in quotes, ever invented. Briefly, Kabbalah exhausts the third semantic circuit by setting it to solve intractable numerological and verbal problems. The Far Eastern equivalent is the Zen koan, which serves the same function in a less maniacally systematic way than Kabbalah, e.g., what is the sound of one hand clapping? Zen koans are always combined with zazen, sitting zen, which combines the first circuit clearing asana with second circuit mellowing breath counting, a weaker pranayama. When the student has acquired sufficient detachment from first circuit anxieties, second circuit emotions, and third circuit reality maps by way of asana, pranayama, and dharana, or mantra, Patanjali recommends the practice of yama. This includes, but is not limited to, celibacy. The ultimate of yama is to lose all interest in both social and sexual aspects of the fourth circuit, to cease to care at all about family, tribal, or societal matters. This is accomplished by self-denial, which is easier for those skilled in asana, pranayama, and dharana, but still requires intense determination. Some take a shortcut at this point, discovered after Patanjali or not known to him, by having themselves locked up in caves. Such isolation, as indicated earlier, helps vastly in bleaching out all 4 hominid circuits. An alternative for those not attracted to either celibacy or becoming hermits is Tantra, invented in northern India around the time of Patanjali. This simply transmutes the 4th circuit by ceremonial, physiological, and magic, self-hypnotic explosion of the prolonged sexual act into 5th circuit neurosomatic rapture. For those following the orthodox path of Patanjali, the 5th circuit is imprinted by niyama, which signifies super control or no control, being the paradoxical state of being spontaneous deliberately. You cannot be taught niyama, you can only learn it by personal experience. We hypothesize that the bioenergetics have to discharge somewhere, and then when one has driven them out of the 1st circuit by asana, out of the 2nd circuit by pranayama, out of the 3rd circuit by dharana or mantra, and out of the 4th circuit by yama, they are driven explosively up into the 5th circuit neurosomatic illumination. The 6th step in yoga, according to Patanjali, is dhyana, which means meditation only in the roughest way. Dhyana means actually union with the object on the mind's screen, realization of the total meaning of the proposition that mind and its contents are functionally identical, i.e., opening the metaprogramming circuit. One can make dhyana on anything. Yogis talk of making dhyana on a tree or a dog, just as Don Juan Matus, the Mexican shaman, talks of becoming one with a coyote or a star in the books of Castaneda. The 7th step in yoga is samadhi, from sam, union, cognate of the Greek sin, and Adis, the Lord, cognate Hebrew Adonai, Greek Adonis. Here Patanjali and his successors are in violent dispute, some claiming there is only one samadhi, others claiming 2 or 3 or many. Since this corresponds with the opening and imprinting of the neurogenetic circuit, we must opt for the opinion that there are many samadhi, depending on which or how many of the godly archetypes of the genetic archives are imprinted. Catholic mystics make samadhi on the virgins, Sufis on Allah, Aleister Crowley on Pan, and above all this, the 8th Circuit Cosmic Information Network can also be imprinted, making union not just with all sentient beings and some emblematic archetype of the DNA master program, but with the inorganic universe as well. It was from this second order or metaphysiological samadhi that Gandhi said, God is in the rock, too, in the rock. And pantheists of all sorts and all traditions emphatically agree with Canadian psychiatrist R.M. Buck, who said after his own 8th Circuit samadhi that the universe is not a dead machine, but a living presence.
Question bubble, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was a good time to recap then.
I think
anyways,
so,
go
yeah,
ahead.
because there's a bunch of run-on sentences, but it's also very full of points where Ra is beginning to connect his own system to a bunch of other systems, which I think is very useful. So maybe if you don't mind, we could go over that real quick, like your observations about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say ahead of time that I am not an expert on yoga, so I probably can't do those connections justice. But I'm going to scroll back up to the top of the chapter. And the idea is that Patanjali, according to Patanjali, there are 7 limbs to yoga, or as we would say, 7 steps or stages. Robert Anton Wilson is suggesting that each of these limbs of yoga, each stage in Patanjali's approach to yoga, is a way to prevent energy from getting stuck in a single circuit and forcing it up to the next circuit. So by doing something like asana, like holding a single meditation pose for a long time, you stabilize the first circuit. You just leave the idea of biosurvival anxiety or pleasure or safety. I guess pleasure is a higher circuit, depending on what you want to think about. It could be considered 5th circuit if you're talking about rapture or bliss. And that forces it up to the 2nd circuit. The 2nd circuit, there we go. The 2nd step in classical yoga, according to Patanjali, is pranayama. So by various breathing techniques, Robert Anton Wilson says you can mellow out 2nd circuit emotional programs. And that sort of redirects the emotional or mental energy or whatever up into the 3rd circuit, again, according to Robert Anton Wilson. And that can be manipulated using dharana or mantra. So dharana consists of concentrating on a single image and ruthlessly pushing aside any other images, verbalizations, or impressions. And then mantra is similar, but it's using a sentence instead of an image. And that stops the third circuit internal monologue if persisted in for long enough periods each day. It's suggested that Kabbalah and Zen koans can be used in a similar way. When the student has acquired sufficient detachment from the first circuit, the second circuit, and the third circuit by using like sitting in meditation poses, by doing breathing exercises, and doing various kinds of concentration exercises, then you would move on to yama. Yama includes but is not limited to celibacy. The ultimate of yama, so the end goal of yama, is to lose all interest in the social and sexual aspects of the fourth circuit. So by disconnecting yourself from the moral and social norms, especially as they relate to sexuality, because there's a lot of emotional and mental energy tied up in sex, and eroticism, and death. Those are all like one sort of ball of energy, if you want to keep using that same metaphor. You are able to shunt that energy up into the fifth circuit. So once you've disconnected from all that stuff, then you wind up in the fifth circuit. And it's suggested that if you're not going to keep such a strict approach as like celibacy or whatever, you could force yourself into the situation through isolation, such as locking yourself in a cave. Or for some people, Tantra can work for that. It is suggested that Tantra transmutes the fourth circuit by ceremonial, physiological, and self-hypnotic explosion of the sexual act into fifth circuit neurosomatic rapture. So by changing the way you approach sexual energy, either in terms of distancing and dissociating yourself from it, or engaging with it in a new way, you are able to take that energy out of the fourth circuit and move it into the fifth circuit. The fifth circuit is associated with niyama, which he's translated as super control or no control, a paradoxical state of being spontaneous deliberately. And this is associated with the fifth circuit, so that state of like rapture or bliss or love is associated with the fifth circuit. And by learning to be spontaneous intentionally within the fifth circuit, you're able to again push that energy up to the sixth circuit, which is associated with dhyana. Dhyana, as Robert Anton Wilson is translating it, means union with the object on the mind's screen, or complete realization that the mind and its contents are functionally identical, which he associates with being able to metaprogram your biocomputer, with being able to identify the mental software that you have running inside of your brain and then make alterations to it, because you are able to become the thing you behold. You're able to adopt new mental operating systems if you get skilled enough at that circuit. And obviously there are degrees to each of these things. Like, just because you're able to attain the sixth circuit a little bit doesn't mean you can totally do some sort of weird theoretical absolute limit of being able to instantly transform your mind into whatever random thing you think of. It's definitely a skill that you very gradually cultivate over many years of practice after doing all those other steps of yoga that are discussed. All right, and then supposedly if you get good enough at that, the energy gets shunted up to the seventh step, which is associated with the seventh circuit. He's associating it with samadhi, which he says corresponds with opening and imprinting the neurogenetic circuit. If you remember, the neurogenetic circuit had to do with the idea of the biosphere as a single organism, or making union not just with all sentient beings, and some emblematic archetype of the DNA master program. So there's this idea that he talked about before, where DNA is like the essential thing driving all organic life, at least on Earth. and that it's all, in a sense, a single organism. But you can go beyond that and have that same sense of unity with the inorganic universe as well. So it's that sort of all is one kind of experience that people talk about sometimes. And that is where we left off. And it's suggested. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about the fourth circuit. I think was he saying that, like, in order to get past fourth circuit, the sort of level that you'd have to disconnect from? I know he was saying about the social, like, disconnect from social things, but does that include like family and friends, if that makes sense? Like, disconnect from them, like, take away all attachment. Am I getting that right?
So there's a difference between what I would say and what he would say. But what he is saying is that that is one of the approaches. But that in order to transcend the fourth circuit, you are going to have to not blindly fit into the social norms of wherever you grow up. That may include changing your attachment to your family and friends in some variety. But if you let social attachments control you, they are controlling you, and it may make that difficult to ascend past that. But that's not the only approach.
Like, sort of like a group identity. So if, like, a group of people, like a group of friends, are interested in, like, partying, or they associate their friend circle with that, is that sort of what you would have to disconnect from? Is that what he's saying, basically?
I think what he would say is that, in theory, if you had enough mental cultivation, spiritual cultivation, you would still be able to engage in those things. But if you let them control you, then they will hold you back.
Yeah, maybe I can add my own interpretation to that, Jake, because again, if you're talking about hacking your mind for better living, then I guess it might come as a surprise, when somebody suggests, okay, now we're going to withdraw from society, like those things don't add up together. So I guess you can kind of rule that one out. So then what's left over, right? Well, my opinion, or my interpretation, and also my experience, you sometimes definitely get held back by the kind of relation you have to certain people around you. That doesn't mean you need to undo those relationships entirely, or, I don't know, stop hanging out with your brother or your mom or your friends. It's more like, how can I recontextualize this whole situation, or how can I rebalance things to a point where everything is beneficial again. I'm not being held back by the situation. There's no detriment to my involvement from the social pressure. I mean, you still want to help out your mom when she needs your help, but you don't want to be subject to her every whim, especially not for once you grow into adulthood and so on. So just there's a lot of nuance to this thing, and it might sound a little radical, I think, where that's not necessarily the intention.
I think I sort of understand it now. I think I was just thinking of it differently.
However, I think you can also pretty much assume that some of these yogi sages were pretty radical in their approach to some of these things throughout history. So I'm pretty sure there have been people who experimented with becoming total recluses and maybe going back into society after that, but I'm not an expert on that to give a deep take.
Yeah, just as soon as you reach the seventh circuit there, I just sort of like, I can't really comprehend how someone can even get into that state, like I think it's called samadhi. It's sort of just blows my
maybe
mind.
after we get through the chapter, I could talk about what that kind of experience has been like for me. But
yeah,
to a certain extent, like, hearing someone else talk about it isn't normally going to transmit the experience. So, like, you could have a rational comprehension of what that experience would be like, but that doesn't mean you actually understand it on, like, an inside level. You don't actually feel it unless you've had it.
all right. Well,
It's kind of like,
we could talk about it after, because I don't want to take up too much time.
Imagine someone writing an essay about what a piece of music sounds like. Like, yeah, you might get the basic idea, and if you've heard enough of that genre of music yourself, like if you've had that kind of experience, you might be able to get it, especially if you know music theory and the person knows what they're talking about. But if you don't know a large amount of music theory and you haven't heard that kind of music before, you're probably not going to be able to really understand what the music is like just from reading like an essay or looking at the sheet music. But yeah, let's continue, and then we will stop again for questions and comments in a few minutes. All right. So there's the idea that Eighth Circuit Samadhi is the experience of that is like realizing that the universe is not a dead machine, but a living presence. The planet is, to put the matter baldly, populated and largely controlled by domesticated primates who are not, in all respects, reasonable men and women. Voltaire may have been exaggerating when he said that to understand the mathematical meaning of infinity, consider the extent of human stupidity. But the situation is almost that bad. Millions have been murdered by stupid leaders or stupid mobs for stupid reasons in every century, and the bizarre, accidentally imprinted reality tunnels which make this possible continue to rule us and robotize us. Nor is the stupidity the exclusive possession of one group or another. You do not need a vocation for you do not need a vocation, for it is you do for the priesthood. You don't need a vocation for it as you do for the priesthood. It seems to be a contagious socio-semantic disturbance which afflicts all of us at one time or another. Notorious examples can be found in the lives of the greats. As we have already mentioned, an exact measurement of the extent of stupidity among the learned is provided by the fact that every scientific revolution takes one generation. Elderly scientists hardly ever accept a new theory, however good it is, and the revolution is only completed when a second generation, free of the old imprints with vulnerable neurons, imprints the new reality map. But if science, the paradigm of rationality, is infested with enough stupidity to cause this general one-generation time lag, what can we say of politics, economics, and religion? Time lags of thousands of years seem to be normal in these areas. Indeed, it was through contemplation of religious history that Voltaire was led to his conclusion that human stupidity approximates to the infinite. The study of politics is hardly more inspiring. Let us just summarize the matter by saying that stupidity has murdered and imprisoned more geniuses and more ordinary people, burned more books, slaughtered more populations, and blocked progress more effectively than any other force in history. It may be no exaggeration to say that stupidity has killed more people than all the diseases known to medicine and psychiatry. Intelligence is the capacity to receive, decode, and transmit information efficiently. Stupidity is blockage of this process at any point. Bigotry, ideologies, etc. block the ability to receive. Robotic reality tunnels block the ability to decode or integrate new signals. Censorship blocks transmission. If intelligence could be increased, obviously solutions could be found more quickly to the various doomsday scenarios threatening us. If each scientist working on the energy resources problem could double or triple his or her intelligence, work that would require 20 years might be done in 6. If human stupidity in general decreased, there would be less opposition to original thinking and new approaches to our old problems, less censorship and less bigotry. If stupidity decreased, less money would be wasted on vast organized imbecilities such as the arms race, and more would be available for life-enhancing projects. There is nothing rationally desirable that cannot be achieved sooner if rationality itself increases. This is virtually a tautology, but we must consider the corollary. Work to achieve intelligence intensification is work to achieve all our other sane and worthwhile goals. Maurice Nicoll, physician, psychiatrist, student of Jung, Gurdjieff, and esoteric Christianity, wrote that the only purpose in work on consciousness is to decrease the amount of violence in the world. This is public health problem number 1 in the nuclear age, the age of overkill. We are not talking about mere increase in linear IQ, third circuit semantic cleverness. We are talking of also the kinds of right brain intelligence that Nicoll acquired from Jungian neurogenetic research and Gurdjieff's metaprogramming techniques. We are talking of, say, Beethoven's intelligence, which so disturbed Lenin, who could not bear to listen to Appassionata, Sonata 23, because it made him want to weep and pat people on the head. And we mustn't pat people on the head. We must hit them on the head, hit them hard and make them obey. End quote. More of Beethoven's intelligence is needed desperately to create a signal that the current Lenins cannot ignore that will make them weep and stop hitting heads. We need more mentations, less munitions. The Second Circuit mammalian political games are a million years obsolete. Dr. Nathan Klein has predicted that soon we will have drugs to improve memory, drugs to erase unpleasant memories, drugs to increase or decrease any emotion, drugs to prolong or shorten childhood. It takes no great imagination to foresee that these chemicals will allow us greater control over our neural tunnel realities than ever before. Obviously, people will use and abuse these potions in many ways, but the most intelligent will use them in the most intelligent way, namely to increase and intensify their intelligence in every direction possible on our spectrum of 8 circuits. Chiefly, they will use them to increase neurological freedom, to debug and reprogram obsolete reality maps, to generally expand consciousness and sensitivity to signals and information. The potential for neurological revolution, planetary intelligence intensification, should be quite clear to anyone who has even a slight knowledge of so primitive a psychedelic as LSD. One of the least known facts about the LSD research is in the 1960s was that the longest single research project with LSD at Spring Grove Hospital showed an average 10% increase in linear IQ alone, as well as the metaprogramming vistas and neurogenetic awakenings popularized by the outlaw LSD culture and its gurus. And there is a direct feedback loop between neuropharmacology and other brain sciences. As William Burroughs says, anything that can be done chemically can be done by other means. Yoga plus biofeedback. Yoga plus biofeedback produces detachment from old imprints quicker than yoga alone. Hypnotism and mind drugs produce synergistically more than either produces without the other. John Lilly has duplicated LSD effects in his isolation tanks. It is commonplace for alarmists to warn us that the full armory of synergistically interacting neurosciences now evolving will allow unscrupulous tyrants to brainwash us more totally than ever before. We need to realize that the same technology, wisely used by intelligent men and women, can free us from every form of neurotic and irrational rigidity to dial and focus our nervous systems as easily as we dial or focus our TV, turning any channel or circuit off and on as we choose. This is what metaprogramming, cybernetic consciousness means. Why be depressed when you can be happy, dumb when you can be smart, agitated when you can be tranquil? Obviously, most people are depressed, dumb, and agitated most of the time because they lack the tools to repair and correct damaged, defective circuits in their nervous system. We are acquiring the tools, and this intelligence intensification has the pleasure principle to fuel it. That is, the more internal freedom you achieve, the more you want. It is more fun to be happy than sad, more enjoyable to choose your emotions than to have them inflicted upon you by mechanical glandular processes, more pleasurable to solve your problems than to be stuck with them forever. In brief, intelligence intensification means intelligence studying intelligence, I squared. And the first thing discovered by intelligence studying intelligence, the brain studying the brain, metaprogramming, is that the more types of intelligence you have, the more fun it is to try to develop even more subtle, sensitive, there might be a typo here, futique levels of awareness. Higher intelligence still. In summary, intelligence intensification is desirable because there is not a single problem confronting humanity that is not either caused or considerably worsened by the prevailing stupidity, insensitivity of the species, badly wired robots bumping into and maiming and killing each other. Intelligence intensification is attainable because modern advances in neuroscience are showing us how to alter any imprinted, conditioned, or learned reflex that previously restricted us. Intelligence intensification is hedonic, because more freedom and consciousness you achieve, the more you want, the less willing you are to slip back to dumb, blind, mechanistic circuits. Intelligence intensification can accelerate our progress toward abolition of war and poverty, find cures for cancer and schizophrenia, achieve space migration and life extension, giving us space enough and time enough to achieve even more cosmic levels of awareness, or accomplish any other worthwhile goals. Like death and poverty, stupidity has been around so long that people cannot imagine human life without it, but it is rapidly becoming obsolete. However many special interest groups, intelligence agencies, so-called advertisers, tyrants, clergy, etc., make profit from stupidity, humanity as a whole will profit more for its abolition. Alright, there's only a little bit more, so I'm going to keep going, and then we will recap. Approximately 50% of the human race has not evolved fully into the third circuit yet. That is, although they can exchange primitive signals and handle primitive artifacts, they are still mostly operating on the mammalian emotional circuit and the pre-mammalian biosurvival circuit. Newt Gingrich is the current leader in the United States. Third circuit types cannot understand this and regard it as sinister, but it is simple mammalian herd behavior. Gingrich is the typical primate leader. The noises he makes, which appear meaningless to the third circuit rationalist, are urgently meaningful to the territorial, emotional, patriotic minds of the majority of primates. Another 20% are responsible, intelligent adults with fully developed third and fourth circuits. They spend most of their time worrying because the predominantly primate parameters of human society seem absurd, immoral, and increasingly dangerous to them. Another 20% are neurosomatic adepts. Fourth circuit moralists denounce them as mystics, space cases, nuts, the me generation, irresponsible hedonists, etc. Most of the Fifth Circuit adepts, Aquarian conspirators, have learned Joyce's arts of silence, exile, cunning. They are invisible. Others have turned their talents to faith healing or various occult gimmicks of that sort, and very carefully do not tell their clients that the local ideology, morality, and reality tonal is what made them ill in the first place. They give good energy and sensibly avoid conflict with the moral ideological authorities. Another 5% have neurogenetic consciousness and function as evolutionary agents, servants of the life force in Shaw's terminology. Their god is Pan, life, and their goal is immortality. Another 3% have mastered the metaprogramming circuit and make up what Gurdjieff called the conscious circle of humanity. They are Freemasons in the original meaning of that debased term, co-creators of future realities. Only 2% are neuro-quantum adepts and beyond space-time categories entirely. All these estimates are approximations. The newer circuits, the neurosomatic bliss, neurogenetic Atman consciousness, metaprogramming reality games, non-local cosmic awareness, must have some function. We can only assume that they are preparing us for our new situation in space-time after space colonization, after longevity and immortality, after the acceleration factor accelerates even faster. Engineers rate an engine in revolutions per second. Looking at history in terms of this metaphor, we clearly see that in the old Stone Age, the acceleration factor was just slowly beginning to operate. We could estimate change then in perhaps revolutions per 10,000 years. With the Neolithic Revolution and urbanization soon after, the pace began to pick up. We can speak from that point on in terms of revolutions per millennium. After Galileo, revolutions per century became the normal rate of change. In this century, we have moved into revolutions per generation. We are now obviously moving into an acceleration of revolutions per decade, and by the time the consciousness revolution peaks, the longevity pill is widely available, cloning is normal, and all the ideas in the book, including the most wild and radical ones, seem quaint and old-fashioned, i.e., about 2005, we will probably be growing accustomed to thinking in terms of revolutions per year. There is no reason to accept the tunnel reality of this book as final. If you really understand the message, you will invent a bigger and better future than I have suggested. As Barbara Marx Hubbard says, the future exists, first in imagination, then in will, then in reality. Alright, that brings us to the end of the chapter. Let's go ahead and stop for comments and questions, or maybe a recap if no one has anything yet. let's recap that part of the chapter then. So the first section that we read was kind of a summary of the book and the different circuits, and then different yogic techniques or limbs that go with each circuit. After that, he goes on almost a rant about stupidity and his ideals about intelligence intensification. And I really like this chapter, or sorry, this, they feel like chapters, this paragraph here. Intelligence is the capacity to receive, decode, and transmit information efficiently. So there are a few parts there. So you can receive, you can decode, and transmit. And according to this definition, the more intelligent something is, the better it is able to do all of those things together. If any part of that is blocked, like if you stop being able to receive information, decode that information, or transmit it, the end result is some form of stupidity. So stupidity is a blockage of that process at any point. From there are different kinds of stupidity, again, according to this precise definition. So specific ideologies block the ability to receive. Robotic reality tunnels block the ability to decode or integrate new signals, and censorship blocks transmission. So if you start thinking about a culture or humanity as a single organism, you can see how each of these things lower the effective intelligence of that collective organism. If a society is engaging in significant censorship, a lot of ideas are not being transmitted, and that just slows things down in general. If you have various kinds of bigotry or controlling ideologies, it prevents you from receiving information. It's kind of related to censorship. The two tend to go hand in hand. And then if you are trapped into a robotic reality tunnel, even if you do receive information that conflicts how you currently process the world, if you are robotically locked into your reality tunnel, you won't be able to decode that information in a way that makes sense to the way you perceive the world. It won't be able to integrate into your life. His suggestion is that the main way for humanity to not die by various means, such as climate change, is intelligence intensification. And the idea being that various tools, whether they are chemical or otherwise, might be developed to aid the increase in intelligence. He does mention some studies about LSD, and I just want to reiterate that just because Robert Anton Wilson talks about a drug does not mean that the VR Mystery School endorses any particular drug. And it's also important to notice that there was a good quote from William S. Burroughs where it says, "Anything that can be done chemically can be done by other means," which is perhaps amusing if you know a little bit about the life of William S. Burroughs. So the idea is that through various spiritual techniques, hopefully new compounds being developed all the time, and perhaps intelligence tools like artificial intelligence or computing, you can increase the effective intelligence of groups of scientists so that they are able to continually get better and better at producing further intelligence tools in those categories, meaning chemical, spiritual, and then computer-related machinic intelligence. And that should hopefully explode. Intelligence studying intelligence. And then he has a probably pretentious or arrogant sounding series of percentages that he ascribes to all of humanity. And perhaps sometimes these anecdotally feel accurate, but it's a little bit hard to just outright call out all of the human race. But he claims that 50% of the human race has not fully evolved into the third circuit yet. And what he's saying is that a very large portion of humanity is more governed by their sense of hierarchy and social status, and also like their immediate sense of safety and well-being, than they are by rationality. and that is part of the issue with the intelligence intensification project is that a lot of humanity is kept from imprinting that third circuit effectively through various tools that are employed by various elites. He claims that 20% are responsible, intelligent adults with fully developed third and fourth circuits, meaning that he believes that about 20% of the world population at the time of writing, which I think was late 80s, around the 80s somewhere, did not, only 20% of humanity were able to effectively act rationally when they needed to, but also were imprinted with the to act in accordance to these social norms and taboos effectively and intelligently. But they spend most of their time worrying because the predominantly primate parameters of human society seem absurd, immoral, and increasingly dangerous to them. There's a quote that you'll see around in a lot of spiritual communities that it's no sign. I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm not going to reference it. But being well adapted to a dysfunctional society does not make you healthy. So if you have developed these higher circuits in a way that they are effectively working and you understand them and are able to control them, the world around you is going to seem toxic and harmful. He claims that another 20% are neurosomatic space adepts, meaning people that have learned to effectively use the fifth circuit. But that a lot of these people, most of the fifth circuit adepts, have learned Joyce's arts of silence, exile, and cunning, meaning they use these tools for themselves and perhaps even to help people around them without actually resolving the issues that make neurosomatic healing necessary. If you lived in a world where the dominant reality tunnels were not harmful in a very physical sense, it wouldn't really be necessary to solve psychosomatic illness. Like physical illness, yes, would still be an issue, but without receiving significant psychosomatic injury from culture at large, there would be less of a need for things like faith healing. All right. Another 5% have neurogenetic consciousness, and they function as evolutionary agents or servants of the life force, and their goal is immortality. So people that have imprinted that neurogenetic circuit, the seventh circuit, or I think it might be the sixth in this book, they flipped back and forth, so I'll say the wrong one sometimes. They tend to be more concerned with the planets, the biosphere, or humanity as a single organism, and their goal is to get it to survive. Another 3% have mastered the metaprogramming circuit, and they are people who are co-creator of future realities, so people that are concerned with the creation and alteration of various reality tunnels, both in themselves and others, and hopefully in a positive way. And then the last 2%, he says, are neuroquantum adepts beyond space-time categories entirely. You'll notice that Robert Anton Wilson doesn't really try to talk about the eighth circuit that much, because he doesn't really think that non-local cosmic awareness can be put into words effectively. And then after that, there are only a couple paragraphs where he talks about the acceleration of acceleration, that we had like a revolution in the way humanity lived once every 10,000 years during the Stone Age, and then once every 1,000 years during the Neolithic Revolution, and then once every century, or a couple times a century perhaps, around the time of Galileo, and then once every generation in the 1900s, and that presumably it will keep continuing. And then perhaps amusingly for us today, he claims that there will be a longevity pill, so a pill that will allow you to live almost indefinitely, and that cloning will be available and normal, and that all of the crazy radical ideas in this book will seem conservative and old-fashioned by 2005. It's worth noting that he died sometime around 2005, So I'm sure he updated his views on things as he grew and developed as a person. So this is just a cultural document. And it says right there is no reason to accept the eternal reality of this book is final. If you understand this message, you will invent a bigger and better future than I have suggested. So there's always that suggestion there that keep updating your ideas, don't take anything for granted. Even if this book is incredibly influential or useful to you, that doesn't mean any of it is accurate or true, it just means it's useful. And that brings us to the end of Prometheus Rising, except for 2 images from the appendix that we'll look at in just a minute. Any questions or comments again?
Chapter wrap up the entire book. Like, it summarized it for me. Like, from the start to finish, sort of the impression I got was like what he's saying about the human race and where we are in terms of development and stuff. I don't know, just sort of felt like a very long summary of the whole book to me.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a long summary of the whole book. There's a lot of ideas in the book, so it's helpful to have that there.
I remember applying a couple of concepts that I learned from this, though. Like, well, I didn't apply any, but like in my everyday life, I would pick up some sort of like I would meet someone and like I would think about the circuits, and like I could judge for myself. Oh, like this is coming from this circuit, if that makes sense. I think what I'm trying to say is that like I've learned a lot and like I kind of apply it in real life now.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me the first time I read this book. It was really cool to realize, oh, I'm using this circuit right now. Or, oh, that person is definitely stuck in whatever circuit. But then also to recognize that that was just one way of categorizing things and not like some sort of absolute truth.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at the 2 appendix images. Oh, well, there was that last quote. The future exists first in imagination, then in will, then in reality. All right, so this first picture here says the neurogenetic script cyclical aspect. And it looks like a staircase that's going up, and then it falls down, and it looks like it starts over again. So, 1, the helpless infant, circuit 1. 2, the walking, struggling, competing child, circuit 2. 3, the word and tool using older child, circuit 3. 4, imprinting, conditioning the sexual circuit, 4, into domesticated parenthood. 5, reproduction, and the cycle continues. And we have a quote from Finnegan's Wake. And for people that aren't familiar with it, almost every word in Finnegan's Wake is a multilingual pun, so I could attempt to translate it, but especially without context, there's going to be a lot of stuff in it that just can't be pulled out. But it says, their weatherings and their marryings and their buryings and their natural selections. And that does do a pretty good job of describing what's here. So you weather your early childhood, like you're struggling with stuff, and you eventually grow up to be an adult where you marry. Your buryings, people are going to die, but also be born, because there are a lot of sexual puns in Finnegan's Wake. But you end up bringing a child into the world, and then their natural selections, because a lot of times trauma is generational, and the things that get selected by nature, by circumstance, get imprinted onto you, and then there's a resonance between yourself and anyone that you raise or are just close to in childhood, and it can sort of get passed on. All right, and then we have a different one here, which is the neurogenetic script spiraling, the upward spiraling aspect. So 1, we have primitive organisms recapitulated in infancy. So human infants, in a certain sense, are like the primitive organisms, the very first ones to evolve. And then 2, there's the vertebrate struggle. So like the first vertebrate organisms that are evolving, that's recapitulated, realized again in childhood. So as you first start learning to walk and move around, there's a resonance or a harmony with the first vertebrate organisms evolving and eventually crawling up onto land. 3, we have the semantic technological learning recapitulated in school. So just as early hominids gradually learned to use symbols to communicate with each other and to build tools and share them, that again has a harmony with when you reach school and you start learning all of those things and they're shared with you. 4, you have socio-sexual domesticity. So he's claiming this is where most people drop off, even if they get that far. But that at some point, based on your cultural norms, if you end up fitting into those, you end up partnering off with however many people, again, depending on your culture, and then producing children to start the pattern over and over again, just like we saw in this first appendix image. But Robert Anton Wilson is hoping that after that, you would realize step 5, which is neurosomatic rapture, recapitulating zero gravity and space migration. So again, he has this idea that humanity is going to evolve, and he has an abbreviation he uses: space migration, intelligence, and life extension, and that those two things will be related, and that once enough of humanity has realized the 5th circuit neurosomatic rapture, that will be around the time that humanity starts migrating out into outer space. But that'll obviously be for a while. 6, neurogenetic vision, precapitulating. Oh, and I said that wrong before. This is precapitulating because it hasn't happened yet. So precapitulating longevity, immortality. So he's claiming that once enough people have realized that 6th circuit neurogenetic vision of all is one, or the biosphere as a single organism, or humanity as a single organism, or DNA as the master code that controls information realizing itself into the world, that will be about the time that humanity becomes effectively immortal through various means. And that will be important because that circuit where you identify with the biosphere or all of reality, including just inorganic stuff as well, in doing so, you start realizing the ways that things trend as a whole, and you're part within them as a network, which is necessary if you want to live forever, or if an assemblage of organisms is going to live forever. And then 8, metaphysiological cosmic vision, precapitulating what? So the idea is that eventually enough people realize this quantum non-local awareness. What happens after that? Humanity is immortal. What's the next step? And he does not address that, as far as I know, in any of his books. And that brings us to the end of Prometheus Rising.
Yeah, I guess before we wrap it up, Bubble, I should say, well, on behalf of everybody at VR Mystery School, of course, all of the YouTube subscribers who have been following along, some of the visitors who had to jump out in the meantime, including Kati's personal regards, thank you very much for taking us through all these sessions the last little over half year, I think it was. It was amazing.
Around that.
You gave so much more context to all these weird ravings of Robert Anton Wilson, who are definitely interesting, but it can definitely do with some commentary here and there. So it's a fantastic service you've provided all of us, and I really want to thank you for that.
Yeah, it's been great reading this book with all of you.
Awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions or comments really. So when you're ready, feel free to wrap it up, unless you have any other things you want to throw out there. Other comments about his other works maybe, or him as a person, or just leave it at here if you're feeling that. Yeah, that's fine.
I'll throw a couple other things out there. I have not read most of his other work. While he was an editor for Playboy magazine, he did publish a book called, I think it's Inanna Rising, or it could be Ashtar Rising, and it was some of the same concepts but applied to femininity and just cultural evolution, but it was published in Playboy magazine. It's not as well realized as this, but if you really liked Prometheus Rising, you might find some stuff in there. It's definitely available on Amazon. Then there is a book that he did if you're more interested in his approach to Finnegan's Wake. I got the title here, just a second. But he did a book I did not get all the way through because I'm past my Finnegan's Wake phase. where I read like 5 or 6 books on Finnegan's Wake. It's called Quantum Psychology: How Brain Software Programs You and Your World. Oh, wait, no, that's a different book. Well, he did write that book that I started reading, and apparently, oh, there we go. The Finnegan's Wake book. Let me make sure. Yeah, the Finnegan's Wake book is called Coincidence, a Head Test, which is a reference to the electric Kool-Aid acid test, but it's all inside your head because it's Finnegan's Wake. And it has some stuff I haven't seen in any other Finnegan's Wake's books. So he definitely has some other books that are worth reading if you want more of him. And there are a few people that have done mystical systems that are based on the 8 circuits. One of them, Antero Alley, I haven't really read much of their work, but there is a book that they put out where instead of circuits, they call them gears. And it's kind of the same concept, but it was only written in like the 90s, so it was like a slight update of it. So if you want more of Prometheus Rising, that's an option also. And then my last thing that I'm going to add is that I believe that there is a pattern to these circuits and that they can be extended indefinitely. And that if you think about them in groups of 4, you might be able to use logic to identify new ways of being in the world that are not written in this book and explore that. So there's definitely, you can take this system further if you work with it long enough and think about it. Even if you're not able to experience those things, you may be able to conceptualize about them, and that might be useful to you.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned writing about that specifically, and of course you mention every episode or every session we do that you've written on Prometheus Rising. Maybe if you want to, you could put some links up on your link tree. I mean, people know where to find that now, so they could maybe, if they're interested to see what else you have to say about Robert Anton Wilson, they could read your articles on that or whatever else you have. Is that an idea?
Yeah, they're not available in a good spot at the moment due to some publishing stuff.
Oh, I see.
But I'll definitely talk to anyone about it.
Awesome. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, that might be another reason also for anybody listening in on other platforms to stop by and come pick your brain about that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that could, anyone who wants to drop by, I definitely prefer talking in VR or voice over text. So if you'd like to talk, definitely just shoot me a message and we'll figure out a time.
Awesome. And I'm sure in the future Robert Anton Wilson will pass the review again in one way or another. I'm sure.
Yeah. All right. Any last questions or comments?
Nah, just to thank you. Like, the lecture was real cool.
Thanks. All right. Thanks for coming to today's session. A recording will be up on YouTube in the coming days. You can follow what I do outside VRchat over at my Linktree. That's linktree/elephantwords, linktr.ee/elephantwords. If you haven't already, join VRM Discord, we have a URL in the lobby, and consider supporting VRM by donating, supporting on Patreon, or becoming a volunteer. More information at vrmystery.school/support.